takes more than being online to be a great online university. It takes time and experience. University of New England pioneered distance education in the 1950s and has been perfecting it ever since. With features like 24/7 tutor access, we're now rated #1 for teaching quality and support, and the only public university in Australia to receive a 5-star rating 14 years running. So, for an expert online education, choose UNE.
Thank you, Lucy, for agreeing to be interviewed for Law 499 on technology and the law. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, no problem. So my name's Lucy and I'm an employment lawyer at Johnson Winter and Slattery. I've been there for about 4 years now. I finished university from the University of Technology in 2016 and I was admitted in New South Wales in 2016, and I've been working in the JWS employment team since that time, which has been fantastic. I never thought I was going to be a commercial lawyer, but I've landed in a commercial firm and it's been great.
Thank you, Lucy. And so let's ask the first question, which is, what do you see as some of the crucial legal issues in the developments and innovations in technology?
So I think in the context of employment law, breach of confidential information or employees taking information when they leave their employment has always been a big issue in the employment law space. But I think with the development of technology, this is creating both new opportunities for employers to track their employees, as well as it's making employees a little bit clever, and they're learning lots of different tricks on how they can take this information from employers. So that's a big problem, and it poses a threat for employers, particularly as the world, in light of COVID-19, is moving to such an online platform for almost all day-to-day processes. There's a lot of information out there online, and there's a real risk for that information getting to the wrong hands, and particularly for employees taking that information and going to a competitor or setting up their own business, competing. That's a big threat in employment law.
And in your experience, has there been a much difference in employment law in terms of tech companies versus other traditional businesses in terms of those employment issues?
Well, tech companies, they're more willing to jump on new technology and take risks. One area that we see happening a lot is with e-signatures and DocuSign. Tech companies are very keen to get amongst this sort of technology because they are all about streamlining things and taking things, going paperless really, which obviously that poses a lot of issues about whether or not documents can be signed electronically. And obviously for some things you can use e-signatures and DocuSign, and it's a pretty commonly used now. It's actually progressed as a technology quite a lot, and a lot of employment offers of employment are all signed using that way now. But obviously there's still a problem, particularly with deeds and deeds of releases. They have to be executed in a particular way, and that poses a real issue for using e-signatures and DocuSign in order for companies to properly execute documents. There's an issue there. And I think that also flows on to the other issues that technology companies are facing, is that they have so many remote workers potentially in different jurisdictions, maybe even overseas, which opens up another can of worms when it comes to employment issues with employees in different jurisdictions. But if they're working for Australian companies, there are times when an Australian employer might have employees who aren't physically located in Australia who might be protected by our employment legislation, which for employers is particularly international, overseas, US employers, they're not happy about, because Australian employment legislation is so favourable to the employees. So that's another big issue.
Thank you. No, that is quite a distinction. Let me move to my second question, which is a little bit more specific around some of the common legal issues you've observed in these new tech areas. Particularly, I was thinking around everything from big data and artificial intelligence or social media or other issues that you've observed.
So I think the working from home is particularly, like we said, in light of COVID-19, is a fundamental issue at the moment, which a lot of different technology platforms have issues arising from that. So social media, as an example, there's different jurisdictions in Australia have different laws around what you can and can't do on social media, and there's different sort of areas of protection for what employees can do, particularly, for example, harassment and bullying legislation and anti-discrimination legislation. But there are definitely cases out there which have found that an employee's conduct on social media can be found to be in the course of their employment. So employers now have this issue where they have to think about the extent to their liability to their employees who are participating or engaging on platforms such as social media, as well as the protection of other employees who might be suffering at the hands of people on social media. But that also is for other platforms, Slack or Skype for Business or those sorts of platforms. But I think that also then rolls into the other issue we were talking about before of confidential information, and with people working at home, and using different platforms and resources and programs, it's changing the way that traditional confidential information is locked down physically in an office. You're now got everything on iClouds and different platforms, and I think that is that's creating definitely an issue. But then on the positive side, there are ways that employers are utilising technology for to do things that they might not have otherwise been able to do before. So, for example, there's been new legislation recently, the whistleblowers legislation, which puts in significant protections for employees who make a protected whistleblower complaint, particularly to keep their identity out of their complaint. And so a lot of employers are turning to third-party technology providers who can offer a service where employees can make such whistleblower complaint online anonymously and have that complaint processed the entire way up, and the employer can comply with their legislative obligations to protect the employee's identity, but using the technology to ensure, for example, to be able to verify that it is still actually the employee of that company, but protecting their identity at the same time.
Well, thank you. And I was also, as you were saying, that thinking of the health and well-being of employees, how a number of larger companies use like that employee
assistance programs. Yeah, EAPs. It's interesting. Particularly, we use the Centre for Corporate Health as our EAP provider, and I know a lot of corporates use that, and they have now transitioned to providing all their EAP services online. So you can either have telephone sessions, or you can actually have these sorts of Zoom or other video sessions, which is a particularly valuable tool given everyone working from home at the moment. But I think that also leads to the other point which employers are having to wrestle with, which is the fact that with everyone working from home, an employer still has a responsibility to their employee for a safe workplace, even if the employee is working from home. So, right now, people don't have good posture and aren't sitting up, don't have a good ergonomic setup. The employer is still responsible for that. So employers are having to figure out how they can, come up with systems and processes to ensure that their employees have a safe, protected workplace. And obviously that's both physical safety and mental safety and mental well-being.
And have you done any work for clients, things around cybersecurity? Has that been an issue at all?
Cybersecurity is a little out of my specialty, but as far as privacy goes, that is an area that we advise on because, the Australian privacy laws, employee information is actually exempt from that. But generally, there's a lot of issues that employers have to think about with ensuring that they collect private information and store it and maintain it correctly. And obviously when you're going back to the whistleblower, for example, third-party provider, when you're providing a third party with information in that context, employers do need to make sure that privacy rules are being complied with.
Thank you. Lucy, so my last question for today is, what do you see over the next 5 to 10 years as technologies of the future?
I don't know if you heard that, but we kind of some funny noise there. Maybe you can mute yourself as I'm going. I think the biggest challenge for employment law really stems from this concept of working remotely and moving so much of our working processes electronically and online, because I think that encapsulates a lot of the issues we've talked about, you know, how to protect confidential information, how to execute documents, an employer's liability to their employees, security issues about such confidential information. You know, these are all the sorts of issues which, if for an employer, in relation to how their employees are operating, as things move away from the traditional platforms, it's much more difficult. You know, traditionally an employer could sort of take back the laptop that they'd given their employee and say, thanks and good luck at your next job. And they have the laptop which has all the information, all the confidential information that employee might have obtained during their employment. But now they're working from home on our own devices. We have all different programs. There's, you know, it's creating definitely a problem for employers. And then as well as, the security of that information, with people's homes not having the same level of security as employers' workplaces. And, you know, in the city, an office in the city has very different security to people's homes.
Thank you, Lucy. I really appreciate your time today and the insights into technology, particularly in employment law. Thank you.
Thanks.